Hey there everyone, I am Jeff. This is Tabletop Toolbox, and I promise to be occasionally lethargic on this 57th episode of the Weekly Ratchet. Or maybe intermittently apathetic? Oh, I know, sparingly enervated. Whatever, I'll figure it out right here on the Weekly Ratchet. Hello there everyone, and welcome back to the Weekly Ratchet. Thank you so much for joining me here, and as always, I hope you've had a fantastic week of getting to play games with family and or friends. Yes, the big news here at the top of the show is that I have appeared. How does that work? You appear visually. What do you do audibly? I sounded on the 119th episode of the Sporadically Board podcast with Mike and Dan. And actually, now I think about it, that's B-O-A-R-D, not B-O-R-E-D, so I was maybe intermittently stiff. Anyways, episode 119 with Mike and Dan. That was Mike DeLisio of the Dice Tower and Dan Hughes, who has a number of accomplishments under his belt. One of the big ones being the Cora Quest board game, which he co-produced with his daughter Cora over the 2020 kind of COVID era. It's a family weight, very light family weight cooperative dungeon crawler game. We have it in its expansion here, and my daughter likes it all. I think she's kind of already outgrown it. Unfortunately, we haven't even touched the expansion. Also, unfortunately, so I'm not sure if that game is going to stick around much longer, but it's definitely a neat experience if you ever get a chance to check that out with maybe younger kids, whether they're nieces, nephews, grandkids, whatever. Certainly give that one a look. Other than that, they have another game that they're putting out very soon called I Made You a Mixtape. I did a video about that here on the channel. I've talked about it a couple times here in the Ratchet. Just a really fun, simple, light card game. Takes up a little bit of a footprint for what it does, but still a really, really fun game. And we talked about that a little bit during the podcast. We also chatted a little bit about the tariff situation, which I won't go into, but I did plug in that podcast. It was funny because I'd recorded it just before the podcast, did the podcast for 2 hours, and then immediately had to rush over and finish producing the video so that it would be ready in case people heard about it on the podcast, which launched at 6 a.m. this morning. So I did get a video out yesterday. It was kind of not really a top 10, but just a list of 10 games that are really, really good games that you can go and get today without having to worry about any tariff nonsense. They're already here. You can go and get them today. And like I said, I didn't really belabor that topic, but I just thought that'd be a little fun thing to do. I even already have the next list of some games to chat about. And who knows, maybe I'll have a little bit of fun with that until hopefully this blows away. Anyways, I think that's it for this, for the top of this show. I've got a couple of games to chat about. Let's go ahead and get to them. All right, just a couple of new games, and I'll tell you what, these things are still warm off of the front porch because when I started my show notes today, I literally wrote no new games, and then the UPS truck backed up the driveway. So the first one is the Spirit Island Nature Incarnate expansion. This is the newest and quite possibly the last expansion to Spirit Island, as I even mentioned in that tariff video from yesterday. Greater Than Games, which is, does put out this game, is one of the first, I think, major casualties of this economic tariff thing that's going on. Their parent company, Flat River Group, basically shuttered that studio within their lineup. Now they have said that they're going to continue to support their products, which probably means they can continue to produce them. Although I don't really know how all that works. There's probably some fine print and red tape and all that kind of good stuff in there. But anyways, this was the last expansion. This was part of a really, really big Kickstarter that they did, I believe, last year, maybe even the year before. And it was something like a $400 or $500 all-in pledge. Now, I have a lot of Spirit Island stuff, but it's all retail. I don't have any really of the deluxe stuff or Kickstarter things, and there's a lot out there. But when I heard about this news with Greater Than Games, I did go ahead and go out and get a retail copy of Nature Incarnate. This is a solid game. When I talked about in that video, you can certainly go and check out that video if you'd like. I think it's a really, really good game. It's not for everybody, but there are ways that you can experience it, I think, that aren't as scary as everyone makes it sound. If you're just playing with the base spirits and kind of on easy mode, it's actually really quite approachable. Getting your head around that first play or two will be a challenge, but it's such a great experience, especially if you're just playing with a friend, a spouse, whatever it may be. This is just a really solid game. In fact, Tesher, I'm wondering if you've ever played this, because I know you guys are real big on that. Anyways, it's just a really solid game. I don't even know when I'm going to open this. Daniel and I haven't played it in a long time. My wife, it just really wasn't her thing. because it's a little bit more complicated. But anyways, I hope I can check that out at some point. All right, this one. We're going to do it old school. This just came in. This was on the UPS truck. I saw what it was. I didn't even finish unpacking this. I'm really kind of excited about this game, even though I don't really remember what it's about. So you know what? Let's check it out together. Up first, I have a playmat. That's a decent sized playmat. Colorful, nice. It's a map, and I'm all about maps, especially for this theme of game. All right, let's keep going. We have miniatures. I don't think I remember that. Merry Christmas. I promise I'll clean that up later. Here's the Epic expansion pack. I don't know what this has. Some boards, some player pieces. Why is this an expansion? I have no idea. Moving on. The game. Let's get to the game. I think that's it. Off we go. This is Pillars of Heracles. Heracles. I believe that's how you say it. And yeah, a couple of expansions. As I mentioned, I don't really remember what all is in here or what this all is. That's going to fall over. It's okay. This is an epic board game with rich artwork and exquisite components. That's not how you start off selling a game, folks. That's not how you open things up. But okay, that blends area control, deck building, yes, and divine intrigue. Promising an unparalleled and immersive gaming experience, explore a world where legends are forged, rivalries run deep, and greatness beckons. All right, that sounds better. Open with that, and then say, along with rich artwork and exquisite components. Close with that, okay? Anyways, this is a game set in, I believe, Greek culture, sort of Greek mythology, all that kind of good stuff. And I've mentioned before, I really love that sort of Greco-Roman themes. And this one kind of has that, dudes on the map expansion, sort of an idea, probably a little bit of a Civ game to some extent, although it doesn't have city building that I'm aware of. Maybe a little bit of it. There are some buildings here on your player boards. Anyways, just my kind of a theme, the kind of game I'm going to check out. I did not remember that it was deck building. That tells me why I backed it. Definitely one of my favorite mechanisms. So yeah, I am hoping I can get this one checked out. 1 to 4 players, 90 to 120 minutes, ages 12 and up. This is from Tomas Ola. And I recognize maybe one other of these names. Art is by David Sabo. Rings a bell, but I couldn't tell you why. Anyways, Pillars of Heracles. That is it for new games. So let's get to question of the week. All right, question of the week. Last week I asked you, how do you go about selling your unwanted, gently played board games? This was actually a question asked by a listener, and I could not remember who it was. It was kind of submitted as one of those how can I help you segments, and I thought, let's go ahead and bring everybody in on this. And let me go ahead and get through the list. Up first was Rentless, who said he can't really answer this question as he's the one who asked it himself a few weeks ago. Okay. That's fair. Well played. My apologies for not remembering who it was who sent that in. Nothing personal. I promise. Thank you very much. All right, so with that being said, Wonderflonium said he sells games at the Dice Tower East virtual flea market. Also, Wayne Kruger said a local group in his area runs a flea market a few times a year, but that he also utilizes the virtual flea market of Dice Tower East and the Big Game Bash market. He said if he hasn't sold a game through those options, he donates it to charity. Now, real quick, the Dice Tower East and this Big Bash, or Big Game Bash, I had to look it up. Those are all taking place in sort of southwest part of Florida. Sort of West Coast, but not Panhandle, if you will. So obviously, if you're near those events, those are options for you, but we've got a lot of other options here coming up. So up next was Teshra, who said that he relies a lot on Facebook groups, mainly local ones, for buying and selling games. He added that he does a bit of research on a potential seller or buyer to try to determine their legitimacy for his own protection, which is a very good idea. We've certainly all heard, the Facebook horror stories, but I think one of the good things about Facebook and kind of helping you get past some of that nonsense is that ultimately you've got to meet up with someone to make that trade, right? So it's not like you're shipping something and maybe getting kind of screwed in the process, if you will. So yeah, certainly kind of looking at people, make sure it's a legitimate account. I've gotten so many of those, trying to sell things, not games, thankfully. I've sold cars before. And you get to, I'm really interested. I'm going to be out there at 7 in the morning and go look at the car. And then 7 in the morning, no one shows up. And luckily, I just tell people, nah, not going to be 7 a.m. Sorry, tough luck. You can kind of play a little hardball, and usually that kind of weeds out some of the riffraff, hopefully. Anyways, up next is Ty McDonald, who said he's used eBay to sell games, utilizing Facebook Marketplace for, quote, less popular items. He also said he's recently donated a bunch of games to a local library, and they were thrilled for the donation. I do wish that games in library would become a thing, right? I know that there are some libraries, especially where avid gamers work, have certainly sort of implemented some board game programs with success. Jen, the librarian, was a frequent content creator for the Dice Tower Board Game Breakfast a long time ago. I haven't heard from her in a long time, but that was something that she was really, really actively engaged in and was getting all kinds of donations and really cool stuff. But here in Little Ashland, Virginia, we don't have any of that. And I'd be afraid of donating games for that same reason, because I just feel like nothing would ever come of it, right? Oh, cool, yeah, we'll do something with these, maybe. But anyways, that is a great thing, and hopefully those do show up at the library for people to check out. CR Poll said, first, understand that you likely won't get what you want from selling a game. He recommended cash-based options like flea markets, suggesting, though, that these can be hard to find. He also suggested the common route of eBay, but ultimately said that these days he just resorts to donating games that he doesn't want anymore. So there's a couple things I want to unpack through this. There's kind of a lot of different topics within that post, which is fine. I agree that, sometimes you got to lower your expectations, and it kind of helps to do a little research on, okay, what is a game going for? What is the price on, say, Amazon versus maybe on eBay? I go and I check prices out on Board Game Geek Market, and kind of use that to gauge, what I might be able to get from the game. And then, of course, there is that factor of, look, what do I really want for this? Sometimes maybe I want a little more than it's going for, which means I got to get creative in how I try and sell it. Other times it's like, I just want this thing gone. I don't really care what I get for it. A couple of bucks to help maybe offset the cost of whoever's charging me to sell those items at their event, if that makes sense. Flea markets might be easier to find than you think. It just kind of depends on your location, of course. But also the big thing is, and we'll see this comment coming up, is that you got to try and make sure you're selling at an event where board games are kind of a thing, whether it is maybe a comic type or a card, something like Magic adjacent, something like that, where you're there with other gamers, or at least people who appreciate that media, as opposed to just a yard sale or something like that, which we're going to see here in a moment. And then lastly, of course, eBay is fine. With eBay, you got to worry about the whole shipping thing and the extra pricing of shipping, and do you kind of work that into your listing price? There's so much there to consider with eBay that honestly, I've just kind of avoided it for a lot of recent years. It's just, it just feels like it's not worth it anymore. And there's, of course, a lot more competition in terms of pricing that you've got to deal with. It's a good way to go to sell a really big and valuable game. I'm thinking that I might have to list my Andromeda's Edge copy on something like eBay if I want to try and get a fair price for it. The Awkward Meeple, a first-time poster, also agreed that your games might not sell for what you want them to, then gave a list of good online options to consider, like the BGG Geek Market, Facebook, Discord, Math Trades, and etc. He said cross-post whenever possible, and of course, consider donations for stuff that won't sell, adding that he has over 100 games that he's trying to offload himself. And I agree, the struggle is real. Thank you very much for the comment, and welcome to the channel. There's that, you got to kind of weigh whether you want to try and do something local, which is certainly easier in terms of like shipping and meeting people face to face, but you've got a lot smaller target audience versus, of course, the online market. But then you've got, like we said, shipping and all kinds of other stuff to deal with. But yeah, pricing is definitely one of the big things that will kind of get in the way of trying to sell a used game. Yukon Zach said that he tried selling games at a garage sale, but added that anything other than Monopoly confuses people more than anything else. And so he suggested sticking with smaller game conventions with a flea market area, as those folks will know what they're looking at. And that's a very good point, kind of like we were talking about. It's about getting to that right audience and getting to the people who are, Zach made the comment about photosynthesis, and they see a box called photosynthesis. What in the hell is that? It just, obviously, this is not a hobby that everyone is familiar with, and so if you're trying to sell Gloomhaven at Grandma's garage sale, you're going to be taking it back home with you or selling it for so cheap that it's obviously just not even worth it. So I completely agree with that one. Just Joe Blogs made me laugh with this one. He said, selling games, what a concept, adding that he wouldn't know where to start. Maybe he would just send a kid off to boarding school to make room for the extra games instead of trying to sell them. I don't know. I can't argue with that. My wife might, though. But sometimes it is just kind of easier to make more space for games. In fact, I've been hesitant in mentioning this, but off to my shoulder here, I've added this massive Kallax behind me of all of my really big game boxes because I just needed more space to put some of those really large boxes in place. So yeah, sometimes they're just hard to get rid of. I agree. Lastly, Tony Lawhorn said he hates the thought of shipping, so he usually sells at a local convention, though it doesn't happen frequently enough, and so he also utilizes Facebook groups from time to time. Yeah, absolutely. It's, again, that trade-off of local versus online. So a couple things I'll mention here, Rentless, to try and help you out. I did talk to my buddy. I mentioned this in my episode last week. I've got a friend here in town named Winston. He's got a massive game collection and is constantly just trading and selling and buying games. He mentioned a website called 130point.com. I did check it out today. I couldn't really make heads or tails of it, but it's supposed to be a way that you can sort of search for what things are going for. Now, it seems to be focused a lot on like baseball cards and other collectibles. If you can't figure it out, let me know, and I'll see if Winston can help me out a little bit with some better clarity. But same thing. I use a mix of eBay, Amazon, BGG Geek Market to kind of figure out what I should price a game at, and then kind of adjusting a little bit from there based on if I maybe think it's worth a little bit more than that to me, or whether it's worth even less than that. For example, if it's something that the Dice Tower sent me and I've reviewed it and I'm done with it and it needs to go. He also mentioned a Reddit group called Board Game Exchange. I frequently find myself on Reddit, but I don't participate on Reddit in any way, shape, or form. I've heard that it can be just a crazy platform in general. So you can certainly try that out. I know that's I've heard of it before, so I know it's a pretty big community. It might be a good way, if you're trying to offload something, maybe even on the obscure side, might be an easier way to find someone who wants it. But then, of course, again, you've got all these online options. So a lot of people mention Facebook groups. There are a couple of Facebook groups here in the area, and I've had very good luck with those. People will often post stuff that they want to get rid of. They're usually, because they know that they're advertising to a smaller group, their prices tend to be very, very competitive. I mean, I picked up Twilight Imperium for I think $30 or $40. I got Coffee Traders for $30-$40 as well, and that game's going for over $100 because I don't think they've ever reprinted it. And it's just, I just want to get rid of it. I need it out of my house. I need to make room for new games. Take it away. So I've done really, really well with that. I've also been able to post on those groups and say, hey, does anyone locally have a copy of this game? I'd love to buy it. That's how I got my copy of Fast Sloths, by just asking. Anyone have this? It's a swing and a miss maybe, but I got lucky on that one. Local conventions, of course, if possible. I've mentioned many times the RiverCon event, also the DollarCon event that happened here in town. They'll usually let you sell their games. They may take a very, very small percentage of the cuts. I think my buddy at RiverCon, I believe he charges 50 cents a game, whereas the DollarCon event, they try to get like 5% or something like that. I don't really care for that much because all you're really giving me is a table to stack some stuff on. So, making it a reasonable cost, I think, is the right way to go. That's my take on it. Let me see. I mentioned Facebook Marketplace in a pinch, just trying to sell it directly on Facebook Marketplace. Again, you're going to get a lot of people who are going to have absolutely no idea what the heck you're talking about. But maybe you'll find that gamer who does go out and search that market for stuff as well. And I definitely do recommend the BGG Geek Market. That is a good way that you can put a game out there. You don't have to keep relisting it like with eBay. You don't have to worry about it sort of disappearing in a Facebook page or group or something like that, it gets to be more than a few days old, no one's going to see it anymore. It gets covered up by new stuff. You go and you list something out on BGG Market, and it is just there. I have seen games that have been listed for years, and I write off, hey, is this still available? And they usually come back right away, hey, yep, still got it. And then I find out that it's an old version, maybe something I don't want, whatever. But that's just always there. Now they do take a little percentage of the sale as well, and then of course you got to deal with shipping. And I actually wrote this down. I sold a game that the Dice Tower had provided me. I did my review of it. I was done with it, and I ended up losing money in the shipping to send this off to this person. And I believe it was even in the country, but it just cost me a fortune to get it shipped. This was back in like 21 when things were really, really crazy. So I lost money on that, which then leads me kind of the last thing. Yeah, if you can't donate it, look at what point do you just say cut your losses and throw it away. Just get rid of it. I mean, depending on what it is, obviously, if you've got some really valuable game, even something like Ticket to Ride, I wouldn't do that with. But if it's some like really, really small indie game, I've got a game called Barricades from a small designer in Philadelphia. I cannot get rid of it. It's not going to last much longer. Luckily, it's a small box. It's not like it's taking up a lot of space, but at some point, it's got to go. And so that's going to have to be a decision I'm going to have to make. I also have a couple of, the Kickstarter prototypes that have been sent to me. They don't want them back because they don't want to pay the shipping to send it back to them. I don't want to sell it. It's not an actual game. It's a prototype. It's not fair to anybody to say, hey, I'm going to sell you this game, and it's not really the final version, and maybe you got to go download the rules, or maybe it's missing pieces, or it's been kind of beat up because it's been a review copy. I'm not going to sell that. So again, what do I do with it? It's got to go in the trash, get recycled, whatever. Anyways, that is the question of the week. Thanks as always for all the comments and answers. A pretty interesting topic. Definitely one that there's a lot of different ways to go. And so it's really going to be up to you and whatever you're willing to deal with, right? So anyways, thanks everyone for your participation. Let's go ahead and get to some recently played games. Okay, going to try to get through some recently played games fairly quickly and efficiently here. All of these games you have heard about. I'm only going to touch upon some of the more interesting ones with a little bit more detail. And the first of those is Deep Shelf. My buddy Daniel came over for another game of this. It was the third game that we've played of this competitively, just one-on-one. And I did play it once solo over at our cabin. And in fact, I ended the game just a few turns early when I knew that there was no way in hell I was going to hit my objectives. This was by far the most interesting playthrough that we've had of this game. This is a very, very big, heavy, just complicated game of trying to sort of build a not really necessarily an economic engine. There is a little bit of an engine building aspect to it, but basically you're expanding across this board which represents the ocean bed floor. It's split into shallow and deep areas, and you're going to be putting out various buildings, some of them which extract materials from the ocean bed floor. There are these tiles that come out as you expand, and they sort of show you, hopefully, natural resources that you have found in that location, and so you can extract those resources. Each resource kind of has a rare and a refined version of it, if you will, so you can refine those into the higher quality elements. You can also get these little crawlers that'll come out. You can use them to shuffle back and forth and collect those things and take them back to your dock where you can eventually sell them, or then use them to pay for technology that improves basically what your business or what your industry is able to accomplish. Each of you are playing with a different faction. There are 4 different factions in this box. There is a 5th one available through an expansion, which was kind of available as part of that Kickstarter. And so I have everything for the game. And the designer, Richard Keene, provided this to me. So I've been working on a review for this. I have multiple versions of it out there because every time I've played this game, I've had different thoughts about it. And we've always really struggled with this game. The gameplay itself is fairly straightforward. On your turn, you're playing 2 cards. The first card, you can do everything that's on that card, top to bottom, unless it has a power ability, then you can't do it. The second card, you can trigger its power ability, but then that card goes into an overworked slot, whether or not you use a power ability, whether or not it has a power ability. That card goes into an overworked slot on your player board, and it stays there through your next turn. So whatever your second action is that you play on any given turn, you cannot take it again in the next turn. The first action you can. And that's it. Very simple. And there's only maybe 6 or 7 different cards that you're playing throughout the entire game. You're constantly just sort of shuffling these things around. One is always in play, sort of stuck, I should say, in between the rounds in front of you. Everything else is in your hand, and you're using those cards to build new buildings, to refine those materials, extract those materials, maybe take things back to the dock and sell them, or buy things to research those new technologies. And and of course moving your various pieces around the map. That's generally about it until you build a specialty building. Each faction has its own specialty building. The one faction actually has a second submarine. You all get one submarine. The one faction has an extra submarine. And those special buildings have very, very unique sets of rules around them, and they will always give you an extra card that then you can use for some special effect involving that specialty unit or building. That's it. And yet this game is really, really, really hard. It's very hard because there's a really challenging efficiency aspect to everything that you're doing. So, I play the card that says I can extract materials, but maybe I only have one extracting unit out there, or maybe it's sitting on a tile right now that doesn't have anything left to extract, or didn't have anything to extract in the first place, although there's some wonky ways that can happen I won't get into. Maybe you've got a unit sitting, again, where you can't extract anything. Maybe you've got a unit sitting where you can extract, but there's no way to get that material back home. Maybe that unit of yours is already full, whatever. There's all these different things that can kind of trip you up. And my buddy Daniel has made some really, really fascinating comments as we've played this game from time to time, and I've actually written a lot of them down because I want to try and touch upon them in my eventual review for this game. And the latest one that he said was that, this game really just keeps tripping on itself. It keeps getting in the way of itself with a lot of either complicated rules or just complicated processes that make the game frustrating. They really do make the game frustrating. When I want to move, but I can't move because I need to extract first, but I don't want to extract yet because I really want to build something, but if I move, then I can build something I can finally extract, but that's going to take like 3 or 4 turns. Maybe I don't have the money right now, and so you find yourself in this just convoluted pathway of things you need to do that almost end up being an iterative loop, but you don't find yourself in the right place to do any of those things at that moment in an efficient way that feels rewarding. And I think that's a really good way to put it, is that so many of the things that you're doing in this game, they just make you feel bad because you're not doing it as good as you possibly can. And it is very, very, very rare that you can trigger off that move in just the right way and get all these things kind of happen and generate all these resources and maybe trigger some sort of a fancy combo or something. It just never gets to feel that rewarding. And because of this fact that your second action every turn gets used up, again, you have this added complexity of, okay, well, I really want to do this thing twice, but I can't do it until I do this thing. But if I do this thing first and then I do the thing I want to do, well, then I can't do it twice. I got to wait another 2 turns before I can do it again. Then what am I going to do, right? Because now I'm going to be taking actions that maybe I don't want to take because I really want to do this thing a second time. And so it just becomes, you're sitting there staring at the board state going, what can I do to interject one action that then lets me do the things that I want to do in order that I want to do them, but I don't want to waste that one action. I don't want to do something, you can play a card that lets you refine those materials. Maybe you don't have any materials to refine, but you get $1 as the first action of that card. And I think that's the same for every faction. And so there's so many times you're like, I got to do this just for $1 so that I can offset the next moves for my next couple of turns in a way that works for me. And it feels really just, again, punishing that, God, I really want to do things in a different way, and I just can't because of the rules of this game, because of the way that those cards are organized, because of the way that, the build action is build a building and then expand your network. Well, sometimes you need to expand your network before you can build the building, and you're not allowed to do that. In fact, there's even a technology you have to go and get that lets you do that. And it's something like a level 3 or level 4 tech, which means it's going to be a long way through the game before you can do that. And by then, you've probably already kind of figured out your process. It's almost not necessary by that time. By the time you're able to afford that tech, you don't need it anymore. It's not worth it to you anymore. You've done most of what you can already do in the game, and you've kind of gotten things already set up in a way that, again, you just don't need it. This was a really, really long game too. Daniel's faction he played as, which was the Ocean Revival group or something like that. It's the green player, and they're focused on, ironically, green stuff, right? So they want to try and rejuvenate the ocean. As we're sitting here drawing all these resources out of it, they actually have ways that they can kind of reverse the process. They're trying to get more kelp beds back out into the ocean. They're trying to get life to kind of come back, and they can even get points for that at the end of the game, which is nice. I liked as he put it, it was the most thematic he had felt playing that game, which was great. But it also slowed the game down tremendously because there's only a couple different ways the game can end. We've always ended the game with this exploitation track. The more that you're extracting stuff off of the ocean bed floor, the faster you exploit the earth and you end the game. He was able to kind of reverse that process, which meant we played it forever, and we were actually close to finishing the game the other method, which is finishing all the research tracks, which thankfully I had done, and that's where a lot of my points were sitting. But what was weird of it was that as we got to the end of this game, we had done far more in this game than we had ever done before. I had all of my technology spots filled on my board. I've never come anywhere near doing that before. He had built all of his buildings. I had built all but one. Again, neither of us had done even anything remotely close to that much success in previous playthroughs because we just had a lot more time. But then what it meant was that the endgame scoring was really, really, really tight because we had almost both done everything that you can do, and because the scoring is not really necessarily based on your faction. And I've talked about this in the past, and even Richard commented on it, was that he found in playthroughs and testing this game out was that people wanted to get rewarded for what they'd kind of done on the board more than what they wanted to get rewarded for doing on their own player board, which I still don't, if I'm honest, I don't fully understand. But one of the big point spreads is just who has built the most stuff in the shallow and the most stuff in the deep. And Dana was beating me on both of those things, and I knew right there that was going to be it for the game for me. It didn't matter what else I had done. I was going to lose because of those 17 points that he was going to get. And so I had to focus an awful lot of effort in just evening the odds, or at least tying him in some of those areas, which I did. I tied him in the shallow. I ended up getting the lead on the deep just by a technology, which just didn't really feel rewarding. It felt like I was working towards, again, I was just playing for the end game points, and I wasn't playing to try and do the most with my faction, and that was just a little off-putting, I think. I won't belabor this anymore for this video. I think it's a good game. I agree that it is a good game, but it is definitely not for everybody. For one thing, 4.5 hours for a 2-player game, nobody really wants to do that. Nobody. I mean, we're good buddies. We'll put up with it. But my wife would tell me to pound sand long before we would get this game done. Anyways, I think it's a neat game, but I think it's going to be, because of some of its just slog, a lot of people are going to be turned off of this. And you're starting to see that on some of the reviews already coming through Board Game Geek. A couple people just hate this game. I don't hate it. I think it's a really, really neat game. I wish it had been a little more streamlined. I think it could keep a lot of that complexity, but still be smoother in how it plays. I don't know. It's going to be a tough one to review. It's really going to be a tough one to review. Deep Shelf by Richard Keene and Ninth Haven Games. All right, my buddy Mike had me invited me over to visit over the weekend. We played a couple of games, played Patterns. I've talked about this one recently. I finally lost this game. Finally got beaten in this game, and it was interesting because, I talked about some of the advanced tactics I felt like I'd kind of come to understand. Well, at one point, I looked down. Mike claimed this yellow region, and there was a ton of yellow tokens. I finally have a picture of this thing just before scoring, so I'll show this. If you see this kind of yellow area on the bottom of the board, that was his. And the moment he put that scoring token down, I thought, oh, I just lost this game, because I was a couple of rounds away before I could even get a yellow token out. And I knew that by the time I was going to be able to do that, he would have already flipped enough of those tokens over, which he did, that he was going to get a lot of points. He was going to get a lot of 5-point values off of each of those yellow tokens. And it was going to be really, really hard for me to, sort of overcome that. And I didn't. I lost probably like 6 points. I got it pretty close. But he definitely had a good game of this. So that was Patterns. Still love that game. I need to check it out with my daughter. We played another game of Sky Team. This was the last game, actually, we played that day. And introduced him to this. He's not a huge, co-op gamer, but we had a fun time with this. We still kind of had that instance, though, where we cheated. I put a die down, and he said, well, hang on, if we do this, then, we're not going to move this turn. I said, well, yeah, but we can move now. Oh, no, I just realized that, we had already maxed out one of the sort of tracks, and we weren't going to be able to move 2 spaces, and basically we were going to land just shy of the runway and crash. And he goes, well, do you still want to play that die then? I was like, no, maybe I don't. And so we're not supposed to communicate that way, really, right? One of those games, not supposed to talk with each other, which is not my favorite thing to do in a co-op game. But because of that, hey, we won. I also got some really nice 3D printed stuff for this game. I did not make it myself. This is I got this before the 3D printer was kind of up and running again. But this game has these little sort of indicators, and you can slot them over to show that landing gear is now deployed. And they're usually just little cardboard pieces that you kind of have to set in here, and they're real finicky. But now these actually kind of insert into the cardboard, and so now they just sit in here and they slide, and they're real nice. Now I did notice there is a little piece that you can set over here for one of the optional modules, and these buttons are now in the way, and I do not want to try and get them back out again. So I actually might have to 3D print my own little base to let that tile kind of lift over top of these. Not a big deal. I think I can make that. But I realized that over the weekend. We didn't use that module, but still I was like, rats. Anyways, still just a fun game, fairly quick. My wife and I have had a lot of fun with it, and I want to get into some more of the harder stuff at some point. We might still cheat our way through it. Who knows? Whatever. All right, that was Sky Team. And the last game to mention, I finally got to play the retail version, or the Kickstarter version, of the Last Command game from Ty McDonald. This is a deck builder, so I'll kind of share this just real quick for folks who might be seeing this for the first time. This is a deck building game, a 2-player only game. It's kind of maybe inspired by, or maybe the inspiration was to sort of compete with Star Realms in terms of a deck building 2-player head-to-head combat game. In this instance, though, you're controlling a capital ship. Each player has their own ship, and you're kind of in this broadsides battle to the death in this game. And you're going to have a number of systems. You have engineering, communications, and tactical. And you also have crew members. Now, the crew members sort of correlate to those systems, but they do not have to be played in that system. So you can play an engineer to your tactical system and vice versa. You're going to be managing 2 different decks. You have a systems deck and you have a crew member deck. You have markets of each system, a single market of each crew type, and you're buying those cards throughout the game, putting them in your discard pile, shuffling them through, and playing them out. The crew members will give power to your various systems, possibly some additional benefits, maybe being able to do some repairing, maybe being able to damage an opponent or add a malfunction card, which I'll get to in a moment. But they'll also power the systems, and when you place these system cards, they will consume that power, and they will give you additional actions you can take as well. But then at the end of each turn, you're going to look at each of your system cards that are currently in play, the top one, the topmost visible card. And along the bottom of a lot of those cards will be synergy bonuses that trigger if the appropriate crew member is assigned to that system. So you could have an engineering system that gives you a benefit if you have a tactical, say a weapons operator assigned to the engineering system. And it may do additional damage, or it may let you, make a repair, it may let you draw an extra card, all kinds of other stuff that can happen in there. And I really enjoy this game for those synergies that can happen between the systems themselves, but also between the systems and their relevant crew members. But I got my butt spanked in this game. Part of it is my own fault. I realized as I was playing, I had purchased way too many communications system cards. There were a lot of them that gave me extra card draws. There were a couple that let me repair malfunction cards, and a couple other things I wanted to be able to do, but I just leaned into it too hard. I had very few engineering cards. I had way too few tactical cards. I had a decent blend of crew members, but I just wasn't able to do a lot with my ship because I just kept drawing handfuls of communication systems, and I couldn't keep that system powered up well enough to even be able to play all those cards. The other thing was that my buddy Mike, and I don't think he did this on purpose, but he managed to get a ton of cards that threw malfunctions into my deck. So the way these malfunctions work is, obviously I can play a card and damage my opponent's ship, but the malfunctions go into your opponent's discard pile, and every time that you would draw a card and you draw a malfunction card, you must resolve it right away. Usually they deal damage to your own ship, and then they often let you discard it back to your own discard pile and draw a replacement card. And what that means is that those malfunctions sit in your deck. They don't resolve and go away. They resolve and cycle back through again. But of course, your opponent also still has the card that put that malfunction in your deck to begin with. And so if you're not able to keep that thing out, if you're not able to quickly get those things out of your deck, they just multiply. They keep getting piled up on you. And there was one particular turn where Mike put 5 malfunctions into both of my decks combined in a single turn. And I'm just sitting here getting increasingly frustrated because I had one card to let me get rid of them. And of course, when that card comes out, you have to have that malfunction in your discard somewhere. If they're in your deck, you can't deal with them. And so again, it felt like it was very, very easy to get those cards and very, very difficult to get rid of them. You could kind of misfire the action and you get rid of them. And so I struggled. The only thing is, because I had so many calm cards that let me repair health and get rid of those things, I was able to kind of stay alive longer than I really thought I was going to be able to do, but I did eventually fall. And in fact, I managed to get a couple malfunctions in Mike's deck, and he managed to grab a card that said, anytime you draw a malfunction, your opponent has to suffer the damage instead, and that was actually how I died. So I still died by malfunction cards, even though they weren't in my own damn deck. That one hurt. I was even bugging Ty a little bit over the weekend. I was like, man, that was a rough game. I didn't really have a ton of fun in that one. I obviously still very much enjoy the game. I just had a bad play of it for sure. And I wonder if I had built my deck a little different. I did have Mike down to like 5 health at one point, and on my last turn, which I did not get to play, I had drawn the cards, but I died before I could activate the turn. I could deal 5 damage, but he also repaired 3 before his turn was over after I was already dead. Anyways, that was Last Command. Yeah, a rough play of it, but still just a very fun game. And I've been bugging Ty. There's a shield module that he's working on that I really want to get to play with. I talked about it in a previous episode here on the PAX Unplugged episode, but that would have helped me because I would have leaned pretty hard into that too, and that would have kept me alive. Now, of course, who knows what Mike would have been able to do. Obviously, who knows. But anyways, that was The Last Command. Okay, question for next week. So I was on Sporadically Board, and they have sort of this list of rapid-fire questions. Now, they did this a whole lot back in their 50s, 60s, 70s episodes, as I've listened to just about every episode they've ever done. But lately, they haven't had as many guests. They haven't really done this rapid-fire question. So the joke was, as we were getting ready to start recording, Mike did not remember what the questions were. I had to remind him what they were. And one of the questions was, like, your most overrated, most underrated game. I want to do something a little different. I'm still stealing this from another podcast called 5 Games for Doomsday. So anyways, the question for this week is, if you could only play one more game from now until the end of time, what would that board game be? And it may not necessarily be your favorite game. I would not pick, for example, The Age of Atlantis as the only game I would play. It's obviously a silly, hypothetical question, but put some thought into this. Like, if you had to just keep playing the same game, what would be something that you could tolerate time and time and time again and maybe still enjoy, still find new things to do with it, still find new experiments to kind of play with its systems? That is the question for next week. And that, folks, is the end of episode number 57 of the Weekly Ratchet. Thank you, as always, for joining me here on the channel. I appreciate all the participation and feedback. And, folks, I'll chat with you again soon. Cheers.